The night road has always belonged to the desperate and the lost. Long before engines thundered across endless highways, travelers whispered of figures that followed them through the darkness, shapes that could not be outrun no matter how far the lantern's glow stretched ahead. Centuries have passed, and yet the stories have not faded. They linger like a stain that refuses to be scrubbed away, waiting for the quiet hours when most of the world sleeps and only the lonely, the exhausted, and the restless remain awake behind the wheel. It is easy to think of the night drive as a simple thing, an empty stretch of asphalt, headlights cutting through a hollow silence, the rhythmic hum of tires pressing forward through the void. But the silence is deceptive. It lulls the mind, it narrows perception, and it bends reality until something ordinary begins to twist into something unexplainable. A driver will swear he passed the same rusted sign 3 times, though the map insists otherwise. Another will claim he saw a figure by the roadside, tall and still, though no one else in the car remembers it. Sometimes it is only a trick of fatigue or imagination. Other times it leaves scars that never close. Those who survive speak rarely about what they saw. Truckers who spend decades on the road will admit, if pressed, that they prefer not to drive certain routes after midnight. Patrol officers assigned to rural highways will avoid discussing the nights when they received emergency calls that ended with silence on the line and nothing left at the scene but an abandoned car, engine still warm. Families who lose someone along these black stretches of road never stop asking questions, but the road never answers. It only continues to swallow people in its endless dark. Imagine the beginning, a single driver, leaving a town whose lights shrink in the rear view until there is nothing but black horizon. The forest grows dense on either side, swallowing the faint moonlight. The road curves in unnatural ways, and the radio dissolves into static, leaving only the sound of the engine. He thinks he is alone. He tells himself it is only the hour, only the emptiness of night. But the first wrongness comes quietly. A set of headlights appears in the mirror, distant at first, then far too close. They blind him, force his eyes to strain against the glare. He changes lanes. The lights vanish. He is alone again, except he is certain he never saw the car pass. There is a story from the north where forests choke the highways so tightly that even the moon cannot reach the pavement. Drivers there speak of a black truck that stalks those who travel alone. It does not appear in daylight. It does not appear when there are 2 or more passengers awake. It comes only for the solitary, in the hours between midnight and dawn. The sound of its engine is deafening, a low growl that seems to crawl inside the skull, shaking the bones of the driver's chest. If you attempt to outrun it, it keeps pace. If you slow down, it lingers behind, its lights searing the mirrors until vision blurs. Those who have escaped say the truck never passes. It only follows for miles until the driver begins to lose sense of time and place. And then, without reason, it disappears. But not everyone escapes. Patrol reports list the wrecks. Cars overturned in ditches, windshields shattered as though by tremendous force. Yet no skid marks to suggest pursuit. The families remember the phone calls. One last voice saying they were being followed. One last whisper that someone was on the road behind them. By the time help arrived, there was nothing but twisted steel cooling in the night air. The strange thing about these stories is not just their persistence, but their sameness. The details repeat across states, across decades, even across countries. Different tongues, different roads, yet the same image returns. Lights in the mirror, too close, too deliberate. And the same question echoes through every account. What happens in the final moment before the driver vanishes? Was it sleep, a simple lapse of concentration? Or was it something older? Something that has always belonged to the night. Psychologists explain that long hours of solitude induce hallucinations. Fatigue bends reality until the mind creates its own predators. That is what science says. But even science cannot explain why some of these hallucinations leave behind physical wreckage that no theory of exhaustion can account for. Science cannot explain why so many of the wrecks are found in the exact same stretches of road, as though something invisible waits there with patience, taking one driver at a time. One such stretch is whispered about with particular dread. It winds through forest and marsh, its asphalt cracked and forgotten, its warning signs rusted through. Travelers have named it a place where the road listens. They say you can feel it before you see it, a heaviness that grows with every mile. Your chest tightens, your hands grow damp on the wheel, and the silence feels alive. Some say if you stop and turn off the engine, you will hear something breathing just beyond the tree line. No one who stopped has ever admitted to doing it twice. It is here, in these silences and blind turns, that 3 particular stories remain. 3 drives that began with nothing more than a simple journey home and ended in the kind of terror that still echoes across families, communities, and police records. They are not fiction. They are accounts left behind by those who either survived the unexplainable or were never seen again. And before each story begins, one must consider the same question that shadows every driver who presses forward into the black horizon. What else travels these roads when the world is asleep, and why does it choose some and not others? The year was heavy with silence in the valley towns. Factories had long closed their gates, and the highways that once carried workers between city and mill now carried little more than freight trucks and the occasional lone commuter. Along one forgotten stretch of road, a 2-lane blacktop pressed its way between forest and swamp, curving in ways that felt almost deliberate, as though it was designed to confuse. There were no gas stations for 30 miles, no motels, no streetlights, just the constant drone of insects from the marsh and the endless reach of trees that bent inward like a cathedral of shadows. The locals did not call it by its state highway number. They called it the Hollow Road. Generations of residents had spoken of the Hollow Road in cautious tones, though rarely directly. The stories carried more weight in whispers over bar counters than in print or record. Some spoke of strange lights darting through the tree line, brighter than any lantern and colder than any headlamp. Others swore they had seen the silhouettes of people standing in the marshes long after midnight, their figures perfectly still, as if carved from the night itself. The road was not haunted by any one legend, but rather a collection of them, all tied together by the same air of dread. Parents told their children never to take that road when returning late from the city. Drivers passing through by necessity often prayed quietly as their headlights stretched out into the hollow dark. Among these whispers lay one particular account, one that came not from folklore but from a documented tragedy. A man named Daniel, a factory worker in the last of the mills before it closed, had spent years commuting through that stretch. He was known by his family as cautious, never reckless, never prone to excess or risk. He drove the same faded sedan each morning and each night, always keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead. When the mill shut its doors, Daniel kept driving through the hollow road in search of other work, hoping that opportunities might appear in the nearest city. His wife later said he had grown quiet in those months, speaking little at dinner, his mind worn thin by the endless job applications and the mounting debts. It was late one autumn evening when Daniel did not return home. His wife waited by the window, the table still set, the food going cold. Hours passed, the night deepened, and the sound of his car never arrived. By morning, she called the authorities. The search began quickly, with deputies combing the hollow road mile by mile. They found his car 3 days later. It was pulled to the side of the road, doors shut, keys still in the ignition. The headlights had burned out long before the deputies reached it, leaving the vehicle hunched like a carcass under the weight of the forest canopy. The strange thing was not the car's abandonment, but the way it looked untouched. No broken glass, no signs of collision, no forced entry. The driver's seat was empty. The passenger seat was empty. There was no blood, no trace of a struggle. Only Daniel's wallet still resting neatly on the console, as if he had stepped away for only a moment and never returned. The authorities searched the swamp. Men in heavy boots waded waist-deep through the black water, dogs straining against their leashes as they picked up scents that led nowhere. Helicopters circled overhead, searching for heat signatures in the undergrowth. Nothing emerged. It was as though Daniel had simply dissolved into the night air, leaving behind only his vehicle as proof that he had been there. His wife pleaded for more time, for more resources, but after weeks of fruitless searching, the case went cold. The official explanation was vague. Perhaps he had wandered into the marsh, perhaps an animal had taken him, perhaps the stress of his unemployment had driven him to vanish. None of these possibilities satisfied the family. None of them explained the eerie intactness of his abandoned car. As months turned into years, the hollow road carried its silence again. Other drivers began to speak of odd sensations in the same stretch where Daniel's car had been found. One trucker swore he saw a man standing in the middle of the road, wearing clothes that matched the description of Daniel. But when he braked hard and blinked against the high beams, the figure was gone. A woman who commuted to the city claimed that she saw someone waving from the roadside in the fog, but when she slowed, the figure melted into the air, leaving nothing but the shifting mist. And still others spoke of feeling watched, as though someone was pacing their car just beyond the tree line, their gaze pressing against the glass even when no one was visible. Daniel's family never left the town. His wife aged quietly, her window always open to the sound of the road. She was known for asking newcomers the same question. Had they driven the hollow road and had they seen anything? Few answered. Most looked away, ashamed of their silence. For them, the hollow road was not just a place of travel. It was a wound in the map, a reminder that there were still places where the earth held secrets too dark to be illuminated by human light. What makes Daniel's story stand apart from the other whispered tragedies is not only that it was documented, but that it revealed a pattern. His disappearance was not the first, and it was not the last. Others had gone missing before him, and others would vanish after. The hollow road was not merely an unlucky place, nor was it merely haunted by coincidence. It seemed to demand something, as if the forest itself claimed payment in the form of lives. To the locals, the meaning was clear. The road had always taken, and it always would. On the night of his disappearance, Daniel left the city later than usual. The sun had already drained from the horizon, leaving a sky washed in gray. The last light stretched thin against the black silhouettes of trees. His last recorded movement was a simple purchase: fuel at a dimly lit station on the city's outskirts, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed unevenly and the clerk barely looked up from the register. He paid in cash, nodded politely, and carried nothing with him except a paper cup of coffee that had already gone lukewarm by the time he stepped into his car. The receipt, later found crumpled on the floor of the vehicle, would mark the final trace of his normal life. Witnesses remembered that night as unusually quiet. The air was heavy, carrying the kind of stillness that settles before a storm, though no storm came. The hollow road was darker than usual. A thin fog had crept from the marshlands, coating the ground in low, shifting veils that reflected every passing beam of light. Daniel would have driven cautiously, his eyes fixed on the white lines of the road as the fog rose like breath against the windshield. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The same landmarks he knew well slipped past his headlights in their ordinary sequence. The sagging billboard advertising a long-closed diner, the iron guardrail streaked with rust, the hollow bridge that carried him briefly over the stagnant water of the marsh. Yet that night the landmarks seemed altered, stretched somehow, as though they were appearing farther apart than they should have. Daniel's wife would later remark that he had always been precise with his sense of distance and time, never prone to confusion. But in the last moments of his drive, the road seemed intent on disorienting him. The first sign of wrongness came near the midway point of the hollow road. Drivers often spoke of seeing deer crossing that section late at night, their eyes catching the headlights in sudden bursts of silver. But what Daniel saw was not deer, at least not in the ordinary sense. His car's headlights caught a shape in the fog, tall, angular, standing motionless at the roadside. At first glance, it resembled a man, though its posture was strange, shoulders too narrow, limbs too long. He slowed, perhaps out of caution, perhaps out of recognition that no one should have been standing there. The shape did not move. It did not even seem to acknowledge the beam of light striking it directly. And then, just as the car drew near, the figure dissolved into the fog, leaving no imprint on the ground, no sound in the silence. Daniel would not have been a man to panic. His wife described him as steady, level-headed, not one to indulge in ghost stories or superstition. He likely shook his head, muttered some rational explanation, and pressed the accelerator again. But the seed of unease had already taken root, and the hollow road fed it carefully. Moments later, he noticed the second sign. A faint glow appeared in his rearview mirror. Headlights. They were distant at first, little more than a flicker behind him. But within minutes they grew sharper, pressing forward until they filled the mirror with harsh white glare. Daniel moved slightly to the right, allowing space for the car to pass. Yet the vehicle did not pass. It stayed close, uncomfortably close, its headlights burning into the glass, making it difficult for him to see the road ahead. He signaled, slowed slightly. Still the lights did not move. They lingered behind him with unnatural precision, as though they were tethered to his bumper. The road twisted into another curve, fog rising thicker, the silence broken only by the low growl of his own engine. When he glanced into the mirror again, the headlights were gone. vanished in an instant as though they had never existed. Many drivers might have pulled over then, shaken by the strangeness. But Daniel pressed on. The road allowed no comfort in stopping, no safety in standing still. He continued, gripping the wheel tighter, leaning forward to pierce the fog with his gaze. It was then he realized that the air had grown unnaturally silent. The chorus of insects had ceased. No nightbirds called from the branches. Even the rhythm of his tires against the cracked pavement seemed muffled, swallowed by the trees pressing inward on both sides. The silence carried weight, as though something vast and unseen was listening. Somewhere along the road's last third, Daniel's sense of time began to falter. He had driven the hollow road countless times before, always knowing when to expect the next curve, the next landmark. But that night the road stretched on endlessly, its turns unfamiliar, its surroundings too repetitive. He checked his dashboard clock. The minutes had advanced, yet he felt as though he had been driving the same mile again and again, looping endlessly through fog and shadow. Each time he expected to see the rusted bridge or the sagging billboard, he saw only the same unbroken tunnel of trees. It is impossible to know what he felt then. Fear, exhaustion, or a growing realization that something beyond explanation was unfolding. Perhaps he spoke aloud, as drivers sometimes do when solitude begins to press too hard, whispering words into the silence if only to remind himself of his own presence. But the silence swallowed those words too, leaving him more isolated than before. The final recorded sign of life came through his phone. A call placed to his wife's number at 12:47 a.m. lasted only 11 seconds. She later testified that she answered and heard nothing at first, only a low hum, like static or the rush of distant wind. Then faintly a voice, his voice, "Someone is behind me." And then the line went dead. When his car was found 3 days later, parked neatly at the roadside, the keys still in the ignition, the phone lay on the passenger seat. The last call was preserved in the log, but the device carried no other clues. There were no footprints in the mud near the vehicle. No sign of struggle, only the heavy weight of absence, as though the man had dissolved into the fog, just as the figure on the roadside had done before him. The hollow road had claimed another. When the deputies first approached Daniel's car, they were struck by its ordinary appearance. There was nothing in the position of the vehicle to suggest panic or accident. It rested at a clean angle on the shoulder, as though parked deliberately. The driver's side door was closed, the windows rolled up, and the ignition key still sat in place. To the eye of an investigator, these were not the signs of a crash, nor of a man in distress who fled blindly into the woods. They were the signs of a driver who had simply stepped out for a moment. And yet, Daniel never returned. Inside the car, the details only deepened the unease. His wallet lay in plain sight, resting on the console. The cup of coffee purchased at the gas station earlier that night had grown stale and sour, but still sat in the holder as though untouched. The passenger seat contained his phone, its last call still recorded in the log. No smears of blood stained the interior, no broken glass, no frantic claw marks or signs of resistance. To the investigators, it was as if Daniel had dissolved into the surrounding silence, leaving every trace of himself behind except for his body. The ground around the vehicle offered little more. Mud by the shoulder carried faint depressions that could have been footprints, but they ended abruptly just feet from the car, too shallow to be certain. Dogs brought to the scene picked up a trace of scent and followed it a short distance down the road, before stopping suddenly, whining, circling, and refusing to continue. For the handlers, it was a strange reaction. It was not the behavior of dogs that had lost a trail. It was the behavior of animals unwilling to step further into a place they seemed to recognize as hostile. Witness accounts began to filter in during the following weeks, each one adding a layer of contradiction. A trucker swore he passed the stretch of road near midnight that same night. He claimed he saw a car pulled to the side with its headlights still on. In the rear view, he thought he glimpsed a man standing near the open door, but when questioned further, he grew uncertain. Perhaps it had been the angle of the headlights. Perhaps it had been the fog. He could not say with conviction whether it was truly a figure, or merely the shape of mist bending in the light. Another witness, a woman returning from the city at around the same hour, insisted she had seen no car at all. She drove the hollow road regularly and said she remembered the oppressive fog that night. the way it pressed against her windshield and refused to lift. But she saw no parked vehicle, no headlights, nothing at all. 2 accounts, hours apart. Both from people accustomed to long drives in the night and both contradicting each other in every essential detail. The investigation extended beyond the scene. Deputies interviewed Daniel's co-workers, searching for signs of instability. They found none. He had been tired, yes, weary from months of fruitless job hunting, but not erratic. His routine remained consistent. His conversations were steady. His family confirmed that he had no reason to disappear. No secret debts, no double life. He was in every way an ordinary man driving an ordinary car home along an ordinary road, and yet he had vanished as though erased. The strangest evidence came not from the physical search but from recordings. His wife's testimony about the final call was matched by phone records, confirming that the connection lasted 11 seconds. When investigators replayed the line from the service log, they expected silence. Instead, they heard a faint distortion, a low hum accompanied by what sounded like the rush of distant wind. Within that hum, a single line was discernible, a man's voice heavy and strained. "Someone is behind me." Then abrupt silence. Technicians ruled out interference. The clarity of the voice, though faint, suggested no glitch of static but a deliberate human sound. To investigators, it was the single shred of evidence that Daniel's disappearance had not been a quiet decision to walk away. It was an indication of pursuit. But pursuit by what? Speculation began to spiral among those who studied the case. Folklorists pointed to the long-standing stories of the Hollow Road, tales of phantom lights and shadowy figures that had trailed drivers for generations. They noted the striking similarities between Daniel's account and older reports. The figure by the roadside, the headlights in the mirror that vanished without passing. Skeptics countered that such details were suggestive of fatigue-induced hallucination, a common symptom of late-night driving through monotonous landscapes. Yet skeptics could not explain the phone call. Hallucinations do not transfer through electronic records. There were rumors, too, of artifacts found along the road during earlier searches, items unclaimed, scattered in places no one could explain. A pair of shoes, polished yet damp, discovered miles from the nearest town. A suitcase lodged in the marsh mud, half sunk, its contents ruined but with no owner identified. None of these could be connected definitively to Daniel, but their presence deepened the sense that the Hollow Road was a graveyard of stories that never reached conclusion. Psychological theories entered the investigation as well. Some claimed Daniel might have stepped into the marsh during a moment of dissociation, wandering aimlessly until exhaustion claimed him. But again, no remains were ever found, no evidence of clothing, no signs of a body. The swamp was scoured by helicopters, boats, and search parties, and nothing emerged. If Daniel had truly walked into its depths, it was as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. What remained was absence. A car left behind intact and silent, a trail of footprints too shallow to trust, a final call that whispered of someone unseen in pursuit, witnesses whose memories refused to align, folklore that matched too closely with reality. Each piece of evidence circled the others, never converging into clarity, always pulling further into contradiction. The Hollow Road, it seemed, had staged its own performance of confusion. It left just enough for the imagination to build upon, just enough to keep doubt alive. The question was not whether Daniel had vanished, but whether the road itself had designed the conditions for his disappearance. And if so, how many others had been claimed before him, leaving behind nothing but cold vehicles and unanswered calls? The disappearance of Daniel did not end when his car was pulled from the shoulder of the Hollow Road. It lingered, threading itself into the lives of those left behind, shaping their days and haunting their nights. His wife, who once spoke of him with the calm certainty of familiarity, began to live in fragments. She waited by the window each evening long after the investigation had been closed, convinced that at any moment his headlights would cut through the dark, that the steady sound of his car's engine would hum up the street. For months she left the porch light burning. For years, she continued to ask anyone passing through town whether they had seen a figure by the road, whether they had heard anything strange on that stretch of asphalt where her husband had been erased. The community, too, bore the weight of his absence. The Hollow Road had long been a place of whispered avoidance, but after Daniel's vanishing, silence grew heavier around it. Those who had once dismissed the old stories with uneasy laughter now drove miles out of their way to avoid the 2-lane path, choosing instead the longer, safer routes. Parents warned their children not to speak of it, fearing that even naming the road might invite its attention. Bars and diners filled with quiet pauses whenever the subject rose, and then with sharp changes of topic, as though silence itself was a defense against whatever lived out there in the marsh and the trees. For the investigators, the case did not leave cleanly either. Deputies who had walked the stretch at night spoke little of what they felt there. One man admitted years later that he often awoke drenched in sweat, dreaming of headlights that filled his rearview mirror no matter how far he drove, dreams in which the lights grew closer until they swallowed everything. Another officer refused to take night patrols along the hollow road again, citing an unshakable dread that pressed against his chest whenever he was forced near the forest's edge. Their reports might have closed neatly, but their minds did not. The road had embedded itself into them, not as evidence but as a weight that would not lift. The family, already frayed by grief, suffered in ways that deepened the wound. His children, too young to understand absence, grew into adults who carried the shape of that absence everywhere. They described later how every ring of the phone jolted them with hope and dread, how every unfamiliar knock at the door felt like a possible return. Holidays passed with a hollow chair left at the table, not because they believed he would walk through the door, but because no one could bear to remove it. It was as if by leaving the chair untouched, they held open the possibility that his absence was temporary. That possibility, thin as it was, became a burden they carried like a shadow. Even those not directly connected to Daniel began to feel the tremors of his disappearance. Truckers who once relied on the hollow road as a shortcut abandoned it altogether. Locals began to whisper of seeing more figures in the fog, as though the road had grown hungrier after taking him. People who had never claimed to believe in anything supernatural now found themselves checking their mirrors twice, slowing at empty stretches of asphalt and keeping radios turned up just loud enough to drown the silence. It was not just fear of the unknown. It was the realization that the unknown had reached into their community and torn away someone they knew. Psychologists often describe trauma as a wound that repeats itself, a cycle that replays the moment of loss in infinite variations. That was what Daniel's absence became for those left behind. His wife replayed the final phone call endlessly in her mind, hearing again and again the strained whisper, "Someone is behind me." His children replayed the nights of waiting, the sickening shift from hope to dread as each hour passed. The deputies replayed the search, the endless walking through fog, the dogs refusing to move forward. Each repetition carved the wound deeper, until it became a part of them. There were stories that spread among the community of how the road punished those who spoke too freely about what had happened. A mechanic claimed that after discussing Daniel's disappearance at length in his shop, he began hearing footsteps outside his garage long after closing, though no one was there when he checked. A woman said that she dreamed of the hollow road each night for a month, her dreams filled with the sound of an idling engine outside her house. Whether these stories were products of suggestion or something more, no one could say. But the fear was real. It gnawed at their lives, reshaping the rhythms of a town that had already been withering under economic collapse. Perhaps the cruelest impact of all was the way the road infected memory. People who had known Daniel for years began to struggle to recall his voice clearly. His laughter seemed faint, slipping from their grasp. It was as if the hollow road not only claimed his body, but reached backward through time, erasing parts of him from the minds of those who loved him most. His wife often said she feared not only his absence but the gradual thinning of his presence in her memory, as though the road was still taking from her piece by piece. And so, the emotional impact of Daniel's disappearance was not contained within his family, nor within the investigation, nor even within the community. It spread outward like a quiet infection, touching anyone who dared to remember, anyone who dared to ask why. The hollow road was not only a place where people vanished, it was a place that lingered, haunting the living, reshaping their nights, and leaving them hollowed in ways that mirrored the silence of the forest itself. The psychological scar of one man's disappearance became something larger, something communal, something that still hums through the valley towns whenever the night grows too quiet. When the official report on Daniel's disappearance was finalized, it offered no resolution. The file closed with phrases that spoke more of exhaustion than of truth. Cause unknown, likely disorientation, possible voluntary disappearance. These were words designed to tidy a case that refused to be clean. Yet within the sealed language of bureaucracy, the unanswered questions only multiplied. If he had been disoriented, where had his body gone? If he had walked into the swamp, why had no trace surfaced despite weeks of searching? If he had chosen to vanish, why leave behind his wallet, his car, his life so abruptly? The report satisfied no one. In the years that followed, theories swirled in both official corridors and whispered corners of the town. Each possibility reflected the fears and beliefs of those who spoke it, yet none fully explained the silence that had been left behind. The first theory was the most rational, the kind most investigators prefer. It argued that exhaustion and monotony of the hollow road had induced a hallucinatory state. Daniel, driving through fog and silence after months of stress, may have misinterpreted shadows as figures, headlights as phantom vehicles. When fear gripped him, he might have stepped from his car and wandered into the swamp. Hypothermia, drowning, or entanglement in the marsh could have claimed him. In this version, his disappearance was tragic but ordinary, the result of a human mind breaking beneath weight and circumstance. But the evidence did not fit neatly into this explanation. Search dogs had tracked his scent only briefly before refusing to continue. Helicopters scoured the swamp without result. The marsh, though dangerous, was not infinite. Bodies do not dissolve into water and soil without leaving some trace. Skeptics pointed to the possibility of animal scavenging, but even that could not erase every sign. It left too many gaps, too many absences. The second theory leaned into the human darkness of the road. There had been rumors for years of predators who hunted highways, men who used isolation as their weapon. Some speculated that Daniel had been followed not by phantom lights but by a vehicle that belonged to flesh and blood. Perhaps he was forced off the road. Perhaps someone intercepted him after he pulled over, leaving the car intact as a decoy. In this telling, the hollow road was less supernatural than it was opportunistic, a hunting ground for those who knew the silence would cover their actions. Yet again, contradictions rose. If someone had taken him, why leave his wallet and keys? Why risk discovery by abandoning the car in such an obvious state? Why had no other evidence of crime been found in the decades of similar disappearances? Predation explained fear but not precision, violence but not erasure. The third theory, whispered more than spoken, leaned into folklore. It suggested that the hollow road itself was not a place of accident or crime, but a threshold, a point where reality weakened. Those who believed this spoke of the repeating landmarks, the headlights that appeared and vanished, the voices that carried only as distortion through a phone. They claimed that the road was a kind of corridor, where those who drove alone became vulnerable to something that did not belong to the world of the living. Some spoke of a figure that waited by the roadside, neither fully seen nor unseen, its shape half-built from fog. Others described the black truck that never passed, that pursued without end until the driver's mind fractured. In this theory, Daniel did not die and was not taken. He crossed unwillingly into something beyond. Investigators dismissed such theories as superstition, yet the details aligned too closely with the testimonies. They were not isolated claims. Generations of drivers had described the same images, the same silence, the same feeling of being watched. Folklore often attaches itself to places, but it rarely aligns so neatly with lived experience. A fourth possibility arose later, among psychologists who reviewed the case as part of a broader study of road-induced psychosis. They suggested that roads like the hollow road, long stretches of darkness broken only by monotonous trees, can induce a dissociative state known as highway hypnosis. In this state, the driver becomes detached, performing the act of driving without awareness, vulnerable to hallucinations and impaired memory. They argued that Daniel may have succumbed to this state and wandered from the vehicle in confusion. The phone call, with its distorted sound, could have been the product of a mind unraveling, a perception of pursuit where none existed. But highway hypnosis had never been known to erase a person completely. Dissociation may confuse, it may terrify, but it does not prevent discovery of remains, nor does it leave dogs unwilling to continue a trail. The theory provided a psychological framework, but it fell short of explaining the physical silence that remained. Some locals wove their own interpretations, blending folklore and fear into a theory of exchange. They claimed the hollow road demanded offerings, lives taken at intervals to satisfy whatever lingered in the swamp and the trees. They pointed to the pattern of disappearances spaced by years, always on the same stretch. Daniel was not the first, they said, Nor would he be the last. In this explanation, his car was left intact as proof of the taking, a marker for those who remained, a reminder that the road's appetite had not been sated. No theory satisfied entirely. Each left questions, each collided with contradictions, and perhaps that was the deepest cruelty of all. Not that the hollow road claimed lives, but that it refused to grant certainty. Families were left to choose among explanations, to carry the weight of doubt alongside grief. Investigators carried files that looked closed but felt unfinished, records that whispered their incompleteness each time they were reopened. In the end, the hollow road remained what it had always been, a place where logic faltered, where stories bent toward silence, where theories piled like offerings at the edge of a chasm that refused to reveal its depth. The case of Daniel became more than a disappearance. It became a mirror, reflecting the fears of those who stared into it. Fear of the wilderness, fear of human predators, fear of the supernatural, fear of the mind itself unraveling. Which fear was true did not matter. What mattered was that he was gone, and the road remained waiting. The hollow road remains. Asphalt cracks under seasons of frost and rain. Guardrails rust and bend. Fog rises each year in the marshlands, and still the road cuts its way through silence. Daniel's story has faded from police reports, tucked away in old files and folders, but it has not faded from the imagination of those who live near it.
His name is not spoken often anymore, yet the absence he left remains.
Every empty chair at a family's table, every hesitant glance in a rearview mirror, every whispered warning to avoid that stretch of highway after midnight, all of it is part of the weight the road carries forward. There is a peculiar cruelty in roads like this, in the way they hold memory. They do not change their appearance. They do not carry markers or memorials. To an outsider, the hollow road looks like any other strip of rural highway. Trees lean inward, fog coils low. Insects hum unseen in the branches. But to those who know, the road is layered with absence. It is paved not only with asphalt, but with the weight of everything that vanished along it. Every mile is a scar, every turn a reminder. What unsettles most is not the disappearance itself, but the silence afterward. Death, as terrible as it is, leaves behind a body, a date, a cause. Disappearance leaves nothing but questions that never end. For Daniel's family, the years did not close the wound. They carried it like an open door, waiting for footsteps that never came. For investigators, the case remained a whisper in the back of the mind, a failure they could not explain. For drivers who still pass through, the disappearance is an invisible presence, felt in the tightening of the chest, the involuntary glance at mirrors, the dread that rises without reason. Some who drive there speak of feeling as if the road watches them. Others say they hear faint sounds beneath the hum of their engines, breathing footsteps, voices that do not belong. These are dismissed as imagination, as the brain's way of filling silence with its own echoes. But imagination does not explain why so many feel it in the exact same places, why the air grows heavy in the same curves, why headlights vanish and reappear without logic. The hollow road resists explanation, not because there are no answers, but because it forces those who encounter it to question the limits of what answers can be. Perhaps that is why the story matters. Not because Daniel was unique, but because his disappearance is a reflection of something older. The night road has always carried fear. It is one of humanity's oldest landscapes. The dark path stretching beyond the reach of light. The unseen shapes that wait at its edges. The knowledge that beyond the glow of lantern or headlamp there may be anything or nothing at all. To drive through it is to place trust in a thin strip of asphalt, in machinery in one's own mind. And sometimes that trust is misplaced. What took Daniel? Theories are many, evidence is none. Some believe it was the wilderness itself, the swamp claiming him in silence. Others believe it was human hands, shadows of predators who know that darkness is the perfect cover. Still others hold to the belief that the hollow road is not a place of nature or crime, but of something older, something that feeds not on bodies, but on fear. In that telling, Daniel was simply one of many who walked into its hunger, one of many whose names will never be spoken outside of a local whisper. But the more haunting question is not what took him. It is why the hollow road allows some to pass unharmed while it takes others. Each night, countless drivers travel those same miles. They return home to families, to sleep, to another day. Yet some vanish as though chosen. What separates them? Was Daniel marked by exhaustion, by despair, by something unseen that waited in the fog? Was his final whisper, "Someone is behind me," a warning to others, or was it the last recognition of something inevitable? The road does not answer. It remains stretching into darkness, waiting. Perhaps it is only asphalt and silence. Perhaps it is more. Each time a driver presses forward into the fog, each time headlights cut through its endless black, the question rises again. Will the road let me leave, or will I become part of its silence? That is why the story endures, because it is not just Daniel's story. It belongs to anyone who has ever driven alone at night, who has felt eyes pressing from the tree line, who has seen headlights in the mirror that vanish without passing. It belongs to anyone who knows that silence can be alive, that roads can remember, that some places hold more than they reveal. And so the hollow road waits. Its trees lean closer each year, its fog thickens, its silence deepens. Whether one believes in ghosts, in predators, or in the fragile tricks of the human mind, the result is the same. Some who travel it return, some do not. The only real question is simple, and it lingers long after the story ends. If you were to find yourself alone on that road, headlights burning through the fog, silence pressing against your chest, and a voice whispering that something was behind you, would you keep driving? Or would you realize too late that the hollow road had already chosen you? The answer, like the road itself, may never come.